By Ruthie from FS Securities, a stockbroking firm on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And every Monday morning, as usual, I give you a market update. It's a wrap-up about what happened the last couple of weeks and what we expect from the markets around the world the next few weeks. If you like the presentation, by all means, please give us some feedback. We will appreciate that very much. First of all, over the full week and from around the globe, we start with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which makes up the top 30 US stocks, which had a weekly increase of 1.2%. Actually, if you look at the last 2 weeks combined, the market in America across the three indices were all up by more than 2%. With the best sector is the Nasdaq Technology Index, which of course relies very heavily on export market. If you look at gold actually went down by $57 last week. However, the week before we had a positive increase, which meant that over the full 2 weeks we were down 3.1% or $47.30 US per ounce. Silver was also down by 7.5% last week, and combining the 2 weeks together, we're down 7.1% or $1.28. That's of course per ounce. Crude oil, that's the West Texas crude oil, down 2.2% last week. Again, the week before was actually positive. Combining the 2 weeks together is 1.4% up. We like to give you the 1 and the 2 weeks so you can have a perspective over a bit more than just 1 week and see if the trend continues. And by the way, if you're interested to trade any of the other commodities such as natural gas, wheat, soybeans, coffee or whatever, all you have to do is call us and we'll give you some idea about how to trade them. As a matter of interest, the Australian dollar was up 0.7% over the last 2 weeks. However, last week was down 0.7%, so obviously we had a very good week 2 weeks ago, but that was actually deflected by the losses last week. However, we're still 0.7% higher over the last 2 weeks. Sterling was down 1% last week, and the Japanese yen, that's the US dollar versus the yen, was up 1%, and the euro was down 1.3% last week. Now, looking at our market, the ASX 200 is actually our market gauge, was up 0.8%. However, over the last 2 weeks we were down 0.2%. Our market gauge is made up to a certain extent by 2 main sectors, the financial as well as the materials. When both of these sectors are up considerably, the market responds accordingly. And when they were both down substantially, the market responds accordingly. Well, what happened 2 weeks ago? The financials were down 2.6%. That's combining the 2 weeks together. However, the materials were up 3.1% over the last 2 weeks. And we ended up with minus 0.2% over the last 2 weeks. Look at the various stocks. We've got the best stock over the 2 weeks. We've got AMP up 4.6%, BHP 4.5%, CIMIC, the old Leighton Holdings, up 4.4%. RIA is the best performer, 5.2%, and I'm talking about across the top 20 companies. They can offer us some leverage in options. We also had some good week for Worley, 4% higher. On the negative side, we've seen Newcrest Mines, obviously because of the gold price going down, 7.5% over the last 2 weeks. Most of the drop happened last week with 6.8% drop. We've got Westpac down 1.7%. Actually, over the last 2 weeks, Westpac was down 5.6%. So if you're interested in any of these, all you have to do is call us. We're looking at all the sectors beside financial and materials. Metal and mining was also good last week, and the worst performing sector beside gold, 7.9%, we've got real estate down 1.8% and utilities down 1.5%. It's very important to know which sector is performing the best, and within that sector we try to find the best stock within that sector. We also like to look at volume, because volume is a very good leading indicator. We've had good volume on Friday. However, that volume was actually represented by mainly the losses, because the declines exceeded the advances. The advances on the top row, and the declines happen to be in the bottom row. Looking at the big picture, over the full week, we had slightly more advances than declines, slightly higher. But that's better than the week before, where we had major declining trend. Looking at our mechanical system, which we designed about 20 years ago, which we look at the last 5 weeks, and from that particular slide we can actually start to think about what we're likely to see, whether we're going to see a continuation of the trend or maybe there will be a change in the trend. However, you can see here that the 3 indices in America, for the last 3 weeks, the indicators were very, very positive. And based on what we see at the end of last week, there is no reason why we think that this coming week that America's market is going to be in declining or major decline. Gold went from bearish 4 weeks ago to slightly bullish, and then last week was a bad week for gold and silver. Both of them, for the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader, were actually both on the bearish side. Neutral for the investor, that is the long-term person who trade the market long-term. Crude oil, West Texas crude oil, we went from bearish to bullish to neutral to slightly bullish. Again, I wouldn't really want to trade West Texas crude oil at the moment. But an interesting thing about soybeans, again because of the discussion between America and China about the trade war, we see that soybeans are slightly on the bullish side, with slight decline for the conservative trader last week. Australian dollar is neutral last week. The British pound slightly bearish last week, and the American dollar versus the Japanese yen strongly bullish, and the euro bearish at the end of last week for the very aggressive trader. Looking at the chart for the Dow Jones, you can see that we've hit an all-time high last week, but unfortunately it didn't finish right at the very top of the range. That's the green candle on this side on the left. That is the open here at the bottom of the green box and the closing. However, we've had a higher level during the week. Looking at on Thursday, the market hit the all-time high, and Friday finished higher for the week, however below the high level of the full week range. Still very, very positive, and we have no reason to expect that there will be a major decline in the American market this coming week. Look at our market. We've had a very good week. The all ordinary for the investor as well as the very aggressive trader, very bullish. Financial bearish, gold bearish, telecommunication bearish. Apart from that, most sectors were actually on the bullish side. The mid cap bullish for the long term, neutral for the very aggressive trader, as well as industrial. Look at our chart for the XJO, the ASX 200. Again, we haven't gone all the way to 6,840, which we've seen about 3 months ago. However, we're still trying to climb up, And looking at the stochastic for the weekly, it's positive. The parabolic stop and reverse, positive. The crossover between the 9 weeks versus the 21 weeks, also bullish. So most of the indicators for the weekly is showing us bullish trend. Looking at the daily, and again you need to have a collective trend between the weekly and the daily before we can take a particular position. The weekly, we can see here all the indicators bullish. Looking at the daily now, the parabolic stop and reverse, bullish. Again, the 9-day versus the 21-day, bullish. The candle is above the 21, bullish. There is a bit of convergence with the Bollinger Band, but it hasn't really formed yet. And by the way, when the Bollinger Band contracts, we always like to see where the candle is. If it's above the 21, that is bullish. It may continue to actually explode on the upside. If it's below the 21, it is likely to go down further. Okay, looking at the stocks, the banks, ANZ in particular, 2 weeks in a row on the bearish side. CBA, from bullish 3 weeks ago, bearish 2 weeks ago, to slightly bearish for the very aggressive trader. Looking at NAB, more bearish than last week. And looking at Westpac, bearish. So you can see that all the banks are coming down slightly on the bearish end. And CBA is the lightest bearish amongst the 4 stocks in the banking sector. BHP has turned from bearish 2 weeks ago to bullish. Looking at Rio also turned from neutral to strongly bullish. So there is a reversal in the iron ore price, and I take it that FMG, that's Fortescue, will also have a good bullish indicators. Telstra, you can see Telstra went from bearish last week to further bearish. So certainly you don't want to actually pick up Telstra on the bullish side on Monday today. Wesfarmers, bullish last week, going from bullish to neutral to bearish for the very aggressive to very strongly bullish. Volatile market. Suncorp, you may want to actually look at Suncorp to trade Suncorp on the bearish side. And so is TPG, like Telstra, bearish for the conservative trader, aggressive trader, and the very aggressive trader. Our market in general, the XJR, is bullish, as you can see here. Okay, we also like to look at volumes. Volume can sometimes give us some indication about what happens to a particular stock. Volume is a very good leading indicator, and what you see here on the slide is the weekly volume. Orica Limited had 128% the volume last week in comparing it to the average weekly volume. As you can see here, that's the average weekly volume, 5.1 million transactions, and last week we've seen 6.5. James Hardie also had a good volume last week. Again, that's on the upside. We like to know why. On the downside, we've got Dexus. That's amongst the top 50 companies. That's actually the ones that have got more than 1 billion market capitalization. And for the aggressive trader, we've got here the mid caps. Company called McMahon's Holding, 325% in volume. Instead of the 9.9 million volume per week, we've seen last week 32.3 million transactions taking place. Perseus also had a good week, 181% of the volume. It's interesting that Perseus is involved with gold, and whilst gold was going down last week, we've seen that Perseus was going up with high volume. Again, we need to have a look at Perseus and to see why the volume was higher. On the downside, Karoon Energy. We traded Karoon last week. We made small profit, but it continues to go down with high volume, 706% above the average volume. The average volume being 5.8 million transactions per week. Well, last week we've seen 40.7 million. Again, why? We need to know why. They must have some issues. Jupiter Mines, 261%. Hotel property, 209%. Finally, we now look at what happened last Friday. The Dow was up slightly, and so is the Nikkei index in Japan. The Shanghai index was down 0.5%. Our market was only steady, 2.5 points down to, and finished last week at 6,724. Gold was down 6.6, but we know that gold was down quite substantially right through the week. And the Australian dollar was slightly weaker, got up to 69 cents sometime last week, but finished the week on Saturday at 68.6. Finally, I'd like to talk to you about our CFD trading. On the 18th of October, we finished the week, that particular week, we were actually 81.8% in profit. We've got $4,000 invested in CFDs, and our market value back then, our share portfolio was 7,273, and that was nearly 82% profit. However, the week after, we were down quite badly trading the British pound and Appen, and we were down from 82% down to 65%. That was on the 26th of October. However, 3 days later we managed to recover a little bit, and we were up to 80% profit. From 4,000, our value of our account was 7,205, 3,205 profit, 80%. Last week, this time last week, we told you that we were actually up 89%, our best result ever, nearly 90% profit, from 4,000 to 7,574. However, the very last week, this morning, we can see that our account was slightly down from a week before. From nearly 90%, we were still up in profit to 85.6. What have we traded last week? Mainly Appen, Bramble, and Bramble is actually at the moment is open with a slight loss. However, Appen went down and back up, and we managed to recover our trade. Finally, before I close this particular presentation, our disclaimer. Everything I said today is of only general advice nature. Of course, there is risk. Everything we do has got risk, and before you trade, you need to actually understand the risk and reward, and talk to us if you wish, or you talk to your professional advisor. Remember, I don't know your financial circumstances, so obviously you need to be aware of that. If you have some questions you like to ask, you can write to me at george@fssecurities.com.au. FS Security is the company, George is my name. And if you're ringing from overseas, you can ring me on my mobile. I'm available nearly 12 hours a day. 61 for the country code. You don't need the 0, so it's 61-411-259526. Again, 61-411-259526. Have a good week, happy trading, and hopefully I'll see you again tomorrow and next week.